this week, we have Andrea Prichard back. She's been a member since 2014, and she has been living in Bolivia. She presented last year about living in Bolivia. In the fall, she was a U.S. Fulbright scholar teaching environmental cartography to students and faculty in Panama. Panama is kind of cool. It's one of only 3 carbon negative countries in the world. So it's got a head start on us in terms of forest conservation, and it absorbs more greenhouse gases than are emitted, but it is still at risk from development and mining and deforestation. And so Andrea is going to tell us some about highlights from teaching and exploring Panama, and also information about handy websites and apps in case you want to do some of this. Andrea's been a Rover since 2014 and has been an environmental GIS specialist in Ramsey County, and then got this Fulbright scholarship. It was delayed on account of the pandemic, like everything else in the world. But she was able to do it in the fall, and then after finishing it, she went back to Bolivia and has been working remotely from her home in the Andes with her partner Diego and her dog Isik. So take it away, Andrea. We are really excited to have you back.
Thank you very much, Fran. And that was a very thorough introduction. That's my first few slides already. So thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and get started then. So I did the Fulbright in Panama, and I wanted to start off with what is a Fulbright. And this started in right at the end of World War II. There were excess funds, and the Department of State, through Arkansas Senator William Fulbright, proposed, and it went through, to, instead of using these funds for war, send them for more friendly intercultural exchange with different countries. So there's all that kinds of different fellowships. There's for scholars, there's for students, English teachers, specialists, and others. And it's just as much to bring other students and scholars from other countries to the United States, and I know some people who've done this, as to send USA citizens to different countries. So it just had its 75th anniversary last year. And I just wanted to throw that out. If you have any interest, I have my email address at the end of the presentation. If you're interested or know someone who might be interested, you don't have to be a student. You don't have to be a professor. You don't have to have a PhD. You can apply if you've got a country of interest that you would like to do either a short-term project or long-term research. And it was a really great experience for me. Yeah, it sounds like you covered this as well. Thank you. I did geology, geography, and GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. I had a Rotary scholarship, which is how I originally went to Bolivia. And if you want to know about Rotary Club and their scholarships, feel free to ask me about that at the end as well. Great for international exchange for young people. And I picked up French and Spanish. I had taken them in school, but I didn't feel like I was very good at them. I feel like a lot of us can relate just how U.S. system is for education, although I am very impressed now that there's immersion schools available, at least in the Twin Cities. But since semester abroad was expensive, I decided to just work abroad after I graduated from college. So I taught in France. I was a naturalist in Costa Rica, and with about 6 months in either country of immersion, I felt like I was good to go. I mean, I'll never be bilingual, but certainly functionally fluent. So if anyone has that goal, I definitely recommend immersion. Environmental work, that's always been my passion. I'm a rover in terms of loving hiking and the outdoors, but I heard that you should do what you love professionally to be happy. So I tried to get as many jobs as I could outdoors. So I did environmental education, clean water projects in Ramsey County. I was a park ranger, guide, and worked with water and GIS in general. So that was the setup for the Fulbright that I applied for. So a little bit of space-time orientation. So this is 2019, and I was still living in Minnesota. I felt that I was ready for a change of scenery, however, so I saved up and I left my GIS position at Ramsey County. I applied for the Fulbright and crossed my fingers because that was my plan A for the next job. 2020, this is early 2020. I moved back to Bolivia. So if you know me, then you know that I did used to live in Bolivia, and then I moved to Minnesota from there. I was there for 3 years before, and now I've been here for a couple of years. And I got to Bolivia right before the pandemic really went down. And Bolivia had a very strong protective reaction in terms of closing borders and closing everything down. And I'll talk about that soon, just general interest. And then I was able to go to Panama. I did get the scholarship, I found out in Bolivia, but it was delayed for a year. And I was able to teach at Otema Technological University for 5 months. And I was in the city of David. One just general interest thing is a lot of us think of South America as directly south of North America, but it's quite far east. So where I was in Cochabamba, Bolivia is further east than Maine. Where I was in Panama is out near Florida, for instance. And well, I'll talk more about geography later. Okay, so Bolivia lockdown. This is how I spent most of my time, just in my house. Or it was a shared house with my friend and her dogs, in my room with a computer, because we literally weren't allowed outside our houses for 6 days of the week for a few months, or a couple months. And we were allowed for 3 hours per week on your designated day to go just on foot for grocery, or foot or bike for groceries or pharmacy. There was no cars unless it was an ambulance or emergency services, public or private transportation. All borders were closed, all buses. I mean, you were really stuck. So I was glad that I was where I wanted to be, that I wasn't stuck in transit. I was wanting to be in Bolivia with my friends. So I was quite happy to be there. And the dogs were also very happy to have us there almost 24/7. So since I had a lot of time just hanging out, I kept my GIS skills sharp using COVID data and whatever other data, but there was plenty of COVID data. So every once in a while I would update this one's from early on, March 2020, but just sift through the data and make some maps. On our days out, we were very lucky to live in such a beautiful place. So Cochabamba is in a valley. It's in the Andes Mountains, and it's mid-level as far as Bolivia is concerned. Half of Bolivia is very low level, like Amazon Basin, very hot. And the other half of Bolivia is Andean Mountains, pretty high. This is mid-range mountains. And where we lived in Tiquipaya, we were right here, basically. So we walked up, can you see my arrow? Yes, okay. We walked up this road, which was this road. And it didn't take long before we started up the foothills up to the top, which was 13. I guess I can't see it because this was covered up, but it was very high elevation, something like 13,000 feet. And this was one particular day hike that we did. We brought the dogs. It was, and I used Google Earth because I was curious, how far did we go? Because I was exhausted, and it was 20 miles. So this is just, I'm going to just weave in some geography and Google Earth types of things. If you don't have Google Earth, you should download it. It's free and it's fun. And you can draw out your little trails and see the elevation profiles and get this information, your distances. So I got to do a lot of hiking just because I lived in the Andes. And even though we were restricted to being on foot, it was a nice place to be. So while I did, let me go back first about the Amazon. So this is the Amazon Basin, mostly Brazil, but many other countries encompassing it, including half of Bolivia, which is what I just referenced. While I lived here, I noticed that there's a lot of fires. I mean, almost every week you could see a fire. And sometimes they were big, sometimes they were scary, many times they were out of control. And I found that they're intentional mostly. People set the fires to clear the land, slash burn type of agriculture in many cases, but it's not done in a sustainable way. And in many cases, it's done in order to clear forest and convert it into cattle grazing land or other agricultural land. And that after Brazil, Bolivia has the highest loss of primary forest in the Amazon. And this is getting to be really devastating levels. And this is a graph from 2002 to 2020 that it's trending higher and higher, that this loss of forest. And as you know, this talk is about environmental cartography. So this kind of inspired part of my focus when I was in Panama. And as Fred has discussed, Panama is doing far better than Brazil, than Bolivia in terms of forest conservation. So this slide is to show one other website, which is very handy if you're interested, Global Forest Watch. And in pink are the areas that have more than 30% loss in tree cover. So you can, and here's the Amazon, a lot in Paraguay. But you can tell that it is a problem throughout.
Whenever they come up to see me, it was an exciting.
Okay. And most of the deforestation is in tropical regions, 95%. And of that, most is in Latin America. And most of that is for beef, for cattle grazing and production. So the main drivers basically of this deforestation is beef consumption and demand, and palm oil in the case of Southeast Asia, paper and pulp. So you've probably heard a few times that reducing our consumption of beef and of palm oil is very helpful in terms of forest conservation as well. So I mentioned Google Earth already, and you may or may not know that in addition to the desktop, there's also a phone application, which is very handy, but there's also a few websites, but this one is Google Earth Engine, which is relatively new and very powerful if you actually want to do remote sensing and things like that are a bit more complicated, but they also have very easy to interface with applications. In this example, it's one site in Bolivia, San Julian, and you can see historic imagery from 1984 to 2020, and just see how the land has changed in that time. And you can go anywhere on the Earth because there's satellite images everywhere on Earth for decades. And so you can use the Google Earth Engine and look at the time lapse anywhere. I'm just going to play a very short snippet of an already short video. So this is a different location of Bolivia. So now we come to Panama. So Fran already introduced the terms carbon neutral, carbon negative, and that Panama last year was announced had joined Bhutan and Suriname as being carbon negative countries, that they absorb more greenhouse gases than they emit from human activities. Bhutan and Suriname are relatively small with little population and very high forests, forest cover. Panama has more, it's 4 million people, which is relative to the other two larger, but it is 2/3 covered in forest and also has a lot of mangroves. And so Panama has been added to this distinguished list of carbon negative countries. Here is a map of Panama, and it also has forested areas in green, also has populated areas in red, major cities. So here's, I just have this Panama City over here, and I was in David over here. And there's a term that was new for me, Comarca. So here's a Comarca, Comarca Nube, Comarca Conayala, Comarca Embara. These are all native lands. So these are all indigenous people. And they have different areas that are their own land within Panama. And you've probably noticed that they are overwhelmingly green. And this is not a coincidence. Indigenous land is where most of protected forests are found. And the deforestation, the yellow is agricultural. They cut down the forest in order for grazing or other types of agriculture. It goes right up to the border of this indigenous land. And in many cases, in many parts of the world, it does cross that border. And these are businesses, right? That would make a little more profit if they're not. It's illegal, but if they crossed over and got more logging from one of these lands. And so there's a lot of activism, indigenous activists who are protecting their land, and not just Panama, but all over the world. And it turns out that is very dangerous. So I remember this coming out while I was in Panama, that they had calculated in 2020 that there were over 200 environmental activists who were murdered around the world just to keep them quiet, to keep them out of the way. And 75% of them were in Latin America. And most of those were Colombia and Mexico. And this is terrible. And it's largely farmers and or indigenous people who are protecting their land. I mean, I'm an environmental activist. In my case, it's because I like the mountains, I like to hike there, but I don't have as personal an interest as a lot of these activists who this is how they make their living, this is their home. So in the case of this is mostly against agribusiness, mining, logging, or dam construction. Like building a dam floods out a lot of land where a lot of these people live. So that's just something to be aware of if you weren't, that environmental activism can be very dangerous going up against big businesses. So switching over to my teaching. This is the university, and they put out a lot of different flyers for my courses. And to dive into one of them. So this is an introductory GIS class. This is just part of my class that stayed around for pictures afterwards. I took them to a restaurant as a kind of a graduation thing, but I had a lot of indigenous students in my classes, and they came from comarcas. They bussed in, some of them bussed in hours. And that was really amazing for me, but they were excited that it was a free class because the university charged, but Fulbright program was free. So I really enjoyed working with them and learning from them as they learned from me. And this is one of the maps that I showed them how to make. And this is the forests and where the forests are concentrated in the different provinces and comarcas of Panama. But I also had a lot of ranchers as students. So that was interesting too, that I partnered with some of the professors to work on silvopasture, which is having incorporating trees into the grazing lands, which makes the cows happier because it's really hot in Panama. Better for nutrients and just better for the environment. You know, all the trees that were cut down, so just bringing those back. It's a very ranching heavy area where I was, GDK Panama. In the lower left-hand corner, I'm showing them how to use GPSs. Those were very popular. I ended up buying several and gifting them to the university for use in the program. But that was part of our workshop. So we had a lot of outdoor workshops to learn about how to introduce silvopasture into ranch management. Another fun thing that I got to do was work with a group of high school students. So these were already smart kids who had a lot of success. They had won a Best of Panama competition before they even got to me. But they needed help with ArcGIS Online. So what they had developed was an emergency response platform online. So this is where there's a landslide, there's flooding, there's an earthquake. And what they needed my help with was connecting it to phones, where if you're in an earthquake, then you can just go to a website and write what damage there is, where your house is, how many affected people, and it just auto-populates to a dashboard and it's online. So that kind of helps with their emergency response. So they went on to a regional competition and did really well. So that was fun to work with them. And I showed this story to all of my students. I'd actually seen this on NPR about a young man who's indigenous as well from Panama, who had taken GIS classes and had taken upon himself to map out different communities, different comarcas within Panama in the interest of providing access for emergency services to get to the comarcas in the event of sickness or injury, things like that, because many very much off the grid, and there weren't good maps of where the people live, where the roads are, where the closest clinics are. So he is already working on that when the pandemic hit. And so then he just took it a step further and collected data on where there were COVID cases within Panama, and he developed his own website, which was then built up by a different NGO and then included all the data from the Comarca. So really remarkable young man. So my students, as it turns out, did not have computers in most cases. And so when I was working with them online, I had to adapt my teaching of cartography so they could do it on their phone, which was educational for me as well, because I've always done it on a computer. But I learned that the Google Earth app is great for, this is just one simple example. You can measure a distance, you can measure an area. You can also do Google Street View of anywhere. This is their city. This is David, Panama. And so I would give homework where they would just have to take a screen grab, for example, and do a calculation and just text it to me. So that was new for me. So in this case, I sent them this white rectangle from 1984. This is what this part of Paraguay looked like, all green. And I uploaded it to their Google Drive. So once they opened up their phone from Google Earth, their app, they had that white rectangle, and then within that white rectangle, they had to look at the year, it was 2021, so current, present day, and calculate how much area had been deforested since 1984. And that's just something that any of us can do. And so it was neat to see how you could adapt things to be on the phone. And just to the right is a picture of just a couple of those rectangles. This is a very large area that got deforested for ranching. So I also had in-person classes. Fortunately, the incidence of COVID was relatively low the entire time I was in Panama. So with our masks and everything, we did get to have computer labs. And so I was I was really happy to see their progress. They worked with ArcGIS, with QGIS, with different software, and I gave them a digital elevation model, and they were able to create topographic maps and delineate watersheds and all kinds of exciting things. So I also showed all my students how to use the GPS units. Since I had given those to the university, I wanted to make sure that they kept using them. And we did fun things like where I had them punch in the coordinates, and then they had to go like a scavenger hunt, kind of like geocaching, find where I had given them the point to. But I also let them know this case study of my own personal adventure and misadventure in this case. So I, on the weekends, like to get out and take hikes on the Rover. And in this case, I went to alltrails.com. I don't know if any of you have used that, but they definitely have hikes registered in Panama. So this one looked interesting. It seemed like a good, afternoon hike. It was only 4 miles and pretty view, pretty place. And so I downloaded the track, which is the white line in this map, and put it on my GPS, which is a handy skill. Again, if you don't know how to do that, then you can write to me and I can show you some programs and things. But I put that onto my GPS and went for it. I looked at this elevation. Now this part is Google Earth, the profile, right? So it seemed pretty steep going up. And so I decided I didn't want to go back down. Once I started up that way, I saw it was so steep that it was actually rather dangerous. I didn't want to go back down that way because I thought I might fall. I was hiking by myself, which everyone said, don't do that. There were some tourists who died. And I'm a rover. So I thought I would just go down the other way. So just complete the loop and go down that way, which is more gentle. So that was the plan. And then when I got there, this was the first part of the trail. And I am so impressed with the farmers. It is extremely steep. And they're out there working all day. And I'm just trying to scramble up with my hands and feet to get up first this cabbage patch. And then this is the trail, which I was also grabbing onto roots with my hands. And that's when I decided I'm not going to come back down that way. So here's the top. I was happy. It had taken me an hour to go up for 2 miles. I was huffing and puffing. And then, but then, all downhill from there, 2 miles left. So this made me happy because this is when I finally found the trail again. This is what the trail looked like at its best on the way down. So this white is the trail on my GPS, and this red is me trying to find it. I'm just going everywhere. Everything's decomposed. I'm just going shin deep and decomposed deep litter, and it takes me 4 hours to go the other 2 miles down. And I'm running out of light. It's really hot. I'm thinking about those tourists who died, and they're really told me not to go. But I did make it, and at the very end of the trail, it was again agricultural land and extremely steep and scary to try to go down. And again, I'm very impressed with the farmers because they're out there working by hand, and I got to see these cool creatures on the way at least. Okay, now I'm switching to rovery things. That was kind of a transition from teaching GPS and mapping to what I did on the weekends. So if you were interested in this talk because you're interested in Panama for things like hikes, I can say maybe not alltrails.com, but go to places that are very established, places that have signs, and maps. Some of these trails are really beautiful and well signed, and I recommend going that way. I definitely recommend, if you're a rock climber, or even if you're not, going to Los Ladrillos. So this is Western Panama, Chiriquí. It was an hour from where I lived. David was very hot, quite urban, but if you go an hour north, you get to a town called Boquete, which is near the volcano. which is the highest point in Panama. So going up that elevation makes it a lot more comfortable. So you can see the climber over here for scale. This is columnar basalt, volcanic. So you know how there's, when mud dries, there's mud cracks. When lava dries, so this basalt, it makes these cracks and they go all the way down. So it makes these columns and it's just extraordinary. Oh, there's another climber. So that was really fun. Hanging bridges, this, that's me, and use this one. And I mean, it's very nice. There's a zip line canopy type stuff too. 1,000-year-old tree, they estimate. Waterfalls. I mean, these are established hikes where you have to pay to go on them, and they're not state sponsored. There's no tax money that goes to maintain the trails. So if you want to go on a trail that you can actually see and not get lost on, then you pay to enter, and there's people who maintain it with machetes and all of that, because it is work. So those are some of the more established trails.
This was a really fun place. When I was in Boquete, I stumbled upon a 10K race, and I met this family. The father and the daughter had run the 10K, and they saw me again coming out of the woods by myself. Like, oh, you're hiking alone? Yes, I am. Do it every weekend. And they said, come with us. And they took me to Los Cantiloles de Komarca. And it was stunning. There's a current here, it's a river. So you jump in and you have to swim upstream, or you can swim downstream, and then you kind of rock climb back up. So that was cool. It took me to the beach as well. Here's Sadie at the beach. The tide is spectacular in Panama. It's the difference can be 20 feet between high tide and low tide. Average in the year is 12 feet, but still, it's when they took you to the beach, you had to walk a long way to get to the water. I got to visit there were 2 Fulbright scholars in Panama for that year, and the other one was Milagros Barsayo, and she was in Panama City. So we got to do a little bit of beach time, and we went to Tabu Island, which I recommend, and we set up down our chairs right here, and then before you know it, the water's up again. So now the tide is rising. It's just, and then the whole area disappeared. It was all covered in water. So we had to pick up the chairs and go. But it was nice. Definitely recommended. Then I visited, there were 4 of us total Fulbrighters in Panama that year. And I got to meet one other, Jessica, and she lived in more eastern, highly forested Chepo, Panama. And she works in forest conservation specifically. And I got to go caving with her, which was very exciting. It was a wet cave, which unfortunately had a tragic tour a couple weeks after we went, where there was a sudden water that rushed through the cave and swept some people away. But if you don't go in the rainy season, then I highly recommend it. It was spectacular. Okay, and then the last kind of touristy thing that I recommend that I didn't know before I got there was that coffee is huge in the Chiriquí region. And I got to meet Wilfred Lamastus, who is extremely successful just in the last few years. Their coffee reached the luxury coffee market. First, they got and it's a blind test where people who do wine, like wine tasting, they have professionals in coffee tasting as well, and give it the scores. And they got the best score of all the world's coffees and sold for $1,000 at an auction. And then last year, $4,000 a pound for this coffee. So I got to go tour. I had some researchers with me and who did soil science and things. So we got to go
visit with Wilfred Lamastus, the coffee farm, and obviously bought some coffee, the less expensive variety. And that was and do the actual coffee tasting. So I recommend that if you head to Western Panama as well. Okay, so now back to map links and apps. This is the final slide. Again, I definitely recommend Google Earth Pro.
where you can just draw anything. It could be a line, or you can get the elevation profile or a polygon, whatever you want. And you can export it to your GPS unit or to your phone app. If you don't want to buy a GPS, you can just have it, on Google Earth. I used that for a trek I did a month ago, and it was great. Even when I didn't have signal, I could just follow the trail because it knew where I was, and it had the imagery behind it. So very good stuff if you're not on a trail that's very visible, which happens a lot in Latin America. Historical images, so I'll just do a quick example. Here's Google Earth Pro. In this example, this is in Paradise, California. And I wanted to, I don't know if I can get there because there it goes. Okay. So I wanted to show you, this is before and after wildfire. And obviously you can do this before and after earthquakes. Now they're starting to rebuild. You can, whatever place in the world that you want to be, it's helpful for that. Let's go. Where else? The Google Earth app. I already talked about that. DNR GPS. If you are working with GIS or GPS, Google Earth is in a KMZ format, so it just helps you translate between the GPS language and the Google Earth language so that you can draw something and then export that to your GPS unit or vice versa. Global Forest Watch. So I had showed you one of those maps, and to let you know that you can see that. Sorry, just there we go. So Global Forest Watch, you can look anywhere in the world and see where there's reforestation going on, which is in blue, or deforestation going on, which is in pink. You can learn about any specific country, region, biodiversity. It's just a good environmental source, map source for information. Oh yeah, this one's fun too. Okay, but let me go back in order. Alltrails.com, that's right. So alltrails.com, I did several of these trails. We're in Panama here, but it's obviously all over the world. This is where I lived, in David, Panama. And then up by the volcano is where all of these trails are. So that's where I downloaded that trail that I was interested in. So yep, this is at Cerro Punto Loop, and you can just download the tracks from this website. So that's interesting for if you're going to be brave and try out a trail wherever. Let's see. Basecamp is another free program that you can download if you work with GPSs a lot. A lot of people take the points on their GPS, but then what do you do with it? If you want to see it on your computer, you can see it easily on Basecamp. You could also look at them on Google Earth. The Google Earth engine is right. So this, for example, you press play and it cycles through the years, and you can do this anywhere. You can do it in Minnesota. But that's just if you want to just look at the website, it's earth.google.com. Another fun website, if you haven't looked at it, windy.com, and you can look at rain, thunder, waves, temperature. But it's, in this case, this is where current time the winds are strongest, what directions they're moving. Another fun resource. And I think I only have one more thing to show you to wrap up. Yes. Did you know that you can make maps with Excel? And this is very short, very quick. So here's Excel. Here I have, it's in Spanish because it was part of my lesson, but the country and the air contamination level in 2020. And not every country had the sensors, so I don't have it all there, but you go to data and then, hold on, sorry, let me move this again. Okay. Now, insert and maps. Choose the map, and now you have a very basic map. You can change the way it looks for sure. Get some data labels. Maybe you like this look, and right click, format data series. Oh, the labels didn't go on. Okay. There we go. And you can change the color so that the highest contamination level is red, lowest value blue, whatever you choose. And then you can see where there's the highest contamination level, lowest contamination level. So yeah, if you have data and you just, as long as you have something recognizable like countries, like states, and you have some sort of numerical value, it can map it out for you. So that's a very quick, you change the title. Anyway, just FYI, just to end the presentation with an FYI, that you can make your own map without having to be a GIS expert. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to have any questions or comments. The floor is everybody else's.
How much does Google Earth Pro cost? Is that an expensive thing?
Free, completely free.
Oh, my favorite price. Okay.
Can I just say, wow?
Yeah,
Wow.
That's pretty cool. That is really cool.
Oh my God. Everything is just cool. Cool, cool, cool.
Andrea, back when I was the membership database person, I would use the Excel map function and map the zip codes for all the Rover members to see where we had members. It was a lot of fun.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, Andrea. So actually, Fran put them both in. Does rain damage those crops that are on those steep hills? So back earlier in the presentation, seems like it could wash them out easily.
Well, I will tell you that I'm not an agricultural specialist, but they looked like they were in good shape to me. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't provide a better answer.
I know when Mike did his show, I think it was in the Philippines, they do terraced sort of, so is it terraced down there where you sort of have a flat area, maybe that might hold water? I don't know. I'm not an expert either, obviously, but yeah.
I know terraces are very common in Bolivia and many parts of the world, but I also see very steep plots in Bolivia. So, and there's also very torrential rain in Panama. But I guess with the soil structure and whatever they plant there, they seem to have a good handle on it. There are occasional landslides for sure, but the places that I saw at least were in good shape.
We have another question. It was about the established trails. How much does it cost to hike the established trails? Are these privately owned? And who organizes the maintenance?
About $5. It doesn't break the bank. Some of them were a little bit more, some a little bit less. And yes, I'm pretty sure they're private landowners, and they probably hire somebody who's good with machete to come clear it every once in a while.
So early on, you mentioned a term. That was a wonderful presentation, by the way. And I want to ask this question before you have to go back to your century that you came from, or that technology is that good. But anyway, you mentioned the term Kombaracha or something that was new to you. Will you define that better, please?
Comarca.
Comarca?
Comarca. So, I mean, in the United States, it would be like a reservation, like a Navajo reservation, but this would be a Kunayala Comarca. So it is land, it's indigenous land. And it's so it's like our state is their province, and our reservation, I guess, of native land would be their Comarca.
Cool, thanks.
Mhm.
So I have a question. You're right, and I felt kind of stupid to realize, that South America was so far east. What time zone are you in?
I'm just 1 hour ahead of you right now, so it's not bad.
And one question on the Comarcas. Is there, I know in Minnesota, there's sort of self-rule on I guess you'd call it reservations. I hate to call it that. But yeah, is it similar there, or are they kind of, some areas they're not treated so well? Hopefully they are treated well, but if you'd maybe comment on that, yeah.
And that's another thing where I don't have a lot of knowledge to speak to their experience. One thing I wanted to clarify though is that they are separate from the provinces. So Comarcas are not inside the provinces; they're separate land entities. And yes, they do have their own internal structures and rules and policies, and it's a different. They're all different culturally, and they do integrate in some ways with some cities, but a lot of people don't. They just they stay in the Comarca. And I work with some people still, and I get to hear more and more stories. But they have to walk a long way to get to school, things like that. One student who was she's younger than me. She wasn't allowed to go to school because she was a girl. I mean, there's a lot of things that are different from the city. So, yeah, I certainly did not spend any time in a Comarca, so I can't speak much myself about it.
Recently on the Rover's Yahoo or whatever, people were asking about different GPS. Do you have one that you favor and recommend?
I certainly have not bought a lot of them in order to have a preference. I mean, I've tried the eTrex, I've tried the Garmin GPS maps, and between those, I like the GPS maps. But no, I'm not a gear person enough to have tried a bunch and have a specific recommendation. I'm sorry.
Any last questions for Andrea before we wrap up?
Is there a way to get topography lines from Google Earth?
I like to add that as a layer.
Yeah,
I've done it.
If it can do it, I know, like I use LiDAR maps, but sometimes it would be nice if Google Earth had that functionality. I'm not sure if in your work, like you mentioned mapping topography, how they figure out what the topography is.
Well, what's easy and user-friendly within Google Earth is you can draw a line wherever you want and get the elevation profile of it. But I'm pretty sure you're asking about topographic lines, like 1,000 feet, 1,100 feet, just having those lines.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, that's not just a click type of thing. However, I work in ArcGIS where I can create those lines or I can download those lines, and all you have to do is export them or convert them into a KMZ format, and then you can import that into Google Earth. So that's like that program that I said, that's easy for conversion, the DNR GPS. You just take the file, which is probably a shape file, and you
convert it, you import that to that file and you convert it to a KMZ, and then you add that KMZ to Google Earth Pro. So it's not, I mean, I used a lot of terms that if you're not into GPS as GIS, then it's confusing, but it is quick and easy. If you have the file, then you can convert it and add it, but it's not an easy one-click thing.
Okay, what's the name of the software again, if you could spell it?
DNR GPS. Let me make sure that I've, yes. And it's that program, although it's simple, it's not the most user-friendly either. So again, write down my email address if you have any questions about how to do it. Because it's, once I explain it for 3 minutes, you got it. And you can convert files between different formats, different geospatial files.
Okay, that's great, because I've been tracing LiDAR maps for about a week trying to set up a topography of a place out in the country. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. This was really interesting, and we
Way cool.
learned a lot.